They say experience doesn't count for much anymore, that decades of knowledge can't compete with a fresh MBA and the right last name. Brad Kellerman was about to learn why they're dead wrong. My name is Rick Donovan. I'm 49 years old, and I've spent 18 years climbing from the warehouse floor to the corner office at Kellerman Industries. We manufacture industrial equipment, the heavy machinery that keeps America's factories running. It's not glamorous work, but it's honest work that feeds 1,200 families in our Rust Belt town. I started here straight out of high school, loading trucks and learning the weight of real responsibility. While other kids went to college, I was learning how a single loose bolt could shut down a production line, how one missed safety inspection could put workers in the hospital. Over nearly 2 decades, I worked through every department: shipping, receiving, quality control, vendor management. I earned my stripes the hard way. By 35, I was operations manager. By 40, senior operations manager. By 45, I was running the entire supply chain for a $400 million company. I knew every vendor, every safety regulation, every cost center. More importantly, I knew which corners could never be cut. Old man Kellerman, our founder and CEO, understood that. William Kellerman built this company from nothing in 1953, and he valued people who understood the weight of responsibility. Rick, he'd tell me, you don't just manage operations. You manage people's livelihoods. I took that seriously, maybe too seriously. The company ran like clockwork under my watch. We hadn't had a serious safety incident in 8 years. Our vendor relationships were so solid that suppliers would extend us credit terms our competitors couldn't dream of. When the pandemic hit and supply chains collapsed worldwide, we kept running because I'd spent years building relationships with backup suppliers in 3 countries. But William was 72 now, and the board was pressuring him about succession planning. His son Brad had been working at McKinsey for 5 years, helping Fortune 500 companies optimize operational efficiency. The writing was on the wall. Brad Kellerman arrived on a Monday morning in March, wearing a $2,000 suit and the kind of confidence that comes from never having calluses on your hands. The announcement came in an all-hands meeting that felt more like a coronation. "I'm excited to introduce my son Brad as our new chief operating officer," Williams said, his voice carrying the weight of a father's pride and a businessman's pragmatism. "He brings fresh perspectives from his consulting work with industry leaders." Fresh perspectives. I'd heard that before. It usually meant someone was about to fix things that weren't broken. Brad was 29, 3 years younger than my oldest daughter. He had an MBA from Wharton, a consulting background, and exactly 0 days of manufacturing experience. His handshake was firm but soft, the hands of someone who'd never touched machinery, never felt the heat of a furnace, never understood that behind every spreadsheet were real people doing real work. His first week was a listening tour, or so he called it. He scheduled 30-minute meetings with department heads, taking notes on an iPad while asking questions that revealed how little he understood about our business. "Walk me through your vendor qualification process," he said during our meeting, stylus poised over his screen. I spent 20 minutes explaining our multi-tier supplier system, how we'd built relationships with primary, secondary, and emergency suppliers for every critical component, how we verified safety certifications, tested material quality, maintained backup inventory for supply chain disruptions. "Interesting," he said, not looking up from his notes. "Seems like there might be some redundancy we could optimize." Redundancy. That's what consultants called the systems that kept our workers safe and our production lines running. "Those backup suppliers saved us during COVID," I said. "When everyone else was shutting down, we kept running." "Sure, but that was an exceptional circumstance," Brad replied. "In normal operations, maintaining multiple vendor relationships is inefficient. We're paying for capacity we don't use." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This was how it always started. By his 3rd week, Brad had moved from listening to strategic recommendations. He scheduled a meeting with the senior leadership team to present his operational efficiency assessment. I sat in the back row of the conference room, watching him click through PowerPoint slides filled with consulting buzzwords and cost reduction targets. "Our analysis reveals significant optimization opportunities," Brad announced, laser pointer dancing across projected charts. "We're maintaining 23% excess vendor capacity, storing 40% more safety inventory than industry standards, and operating compliance protocols that exceed regulatory requirements by an average of 15%. I almost laughed. Exceeding regulatory requirements wasn't waste, it was insurance. But Brad saw only numbers on a spreadsheet, not the real-world consequences of cutting corners. Conservative estimates suggest we can reduce operational costs by $3, $2 million annually through vendor consolidation and process streamlining, he continued. This positions us for expanded margins and competitive advantage. The board members nodded approvingly. William looked proud. I looked at the specific line items Brad was targeting and felt my blood pressure rise. After the meeting, I cornered Brad in the hallway. We need to talk about those recommendations, I said. Great feedback session, wasn't it? Brad replied, already walking toward his office. I'd love to get your input on implementation timeline. Those safety inventory levels exist for a reason, I said, following him. And some of those vendors you want to eliminate are our only certified suppliers for critical components. Brad paused at his office door, finally making eye contact. Rick, I appreciate your institutional knowledge, but we need to think bigger picture here. Sometimes legacy thinking holds us back from necessary evolution. Legacy thinking. That's what he called 18 years of keeping this place running safely and profitably. Come by tomorrow morning, he said. I'll need access to your vendor management systems to start implementing these changes. Bring your login credentials. I want to review our supplier databases personally. The door closed between us, leaving me standing in the hallway with a sick feeling in my gut. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a beer and 18 years of hard-earned wisdom churning in my head. My wife Sarah was grading papers. She taught third grade at the local elementary school, while I stared at my laptop screen thinking about Brad's request for my login credentials. You look like someone died, Sarah said, glancing up from a stack of math worksheets. Someone's about to, I muttered. In my line of work, credentials weren't just passwords. They were keys to systems that controlled worker safety, regulatory compliance, and vendor relationships worth millions of dollars. Brad didn't understand that. To him, they were just data points to optimize. But I understood something Brad didn't. Every system I'd built over 18 years was designed with safeguards, documentation, and audit trails. I'd learned early that in manufacturing, you document everything because when things go wrong, people want answers. And when they go really wrong, lawyers and regulators want proof. I opened my laptop and navigated to our vendor management portal. 18 years of supplier relationships stared back at me. Certified vendors, backup suppliers, emergency contacts. Brad wanted to streamline this into a leaner system based on cost alone. He had no idea that the most expensive suppliers were often certified for the most dangerous materials, that backup vendors existed because primary suppliers had failed before, that regulatory compliance wasn't bureaucratic waste, but legal protection. Over the next hour, I did something I'd never done before. I began documenting every single safety protocol, regulatory requirement, and vendor certification in our current system. Not because I was proud of it, though I was, but because I had a feeling I'd need proof of what we were about to lose. I created a comprehensive backup of every supplier qualification, every safety inspection report, every compliance audit from the past 5 years. Then I did something else. I set up detailed logging on my system access, creating automatic records of who accessed what, when, and what changes they made. If Brad wanted my credentials, he could have them, but everything he did with them would be documented. The next morning, I walked into Brad's office carrying a folder thick with documentation and a sick feeling about what I was about to enable. His office was already decorated with motivational posters about disruption and operational excellence, the kind of corporate theater that made my teeth ache. Rick, perfect timing, Brad said, gesturing to the chair across from his glass desk. Let's get this vendor optimization moving. I set the folder down and slid a paper across to him. My login credentials clearly printed. Here's what you asked for, I said. But before you start making changes, you should understand what you're working with. I opened the folder and began walking him through our supplier structure. Primary vendors for critical components, all carrying the necessary safety certifications. Secondary suppliers for backup capacity. Emergency vendors for crisis situations. The costs he saw as waste, I explained as insurance. For example, I said, pointing to a specific line item, Henderson Chemical costs 23% more than their competitors, but they're one of only 3 suppliers in North America certified to handle the industrial solvents we use in our coating process. The cheaper options don't have the proper storage facilities or transport certifications. Brad nodded, but I could see his attention drifting to his computer screen. Sure, but Henderson's been overcharging us for years because they know we're locked in. Competition drives innovation, Rick. Competition also drives corners being cut, I replied. Some things are expensive because they have to be. I appreciate the context, Brad said, already turning to his laptop. but I need to see the actual data to make informed decisions. The spreadsheet analysis only tells part of the story. He logged into the vendor portal using my credentials, and I watched 18 years of careful relationship building appear on his screen like items in a shopping cart. To him, they were just line items to optimize. To me, they were the foundation that kept 1,200 people employed and safe. "This is incredibly helpful," he said, clicking through screens of supplier data. "I'll spend some time this week reviewing the relationships and identifying optimization opportunities." I stood to leave, feeling like I'd just handed over the keys to a teenager. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched Brad systematically dismantle 18 years of operational safeguards using my own credentials. He worked fast, making changes with the confidence of someone who'd never seen the consequences of cutting corners in heavy manufacturing. My system logs told the story in brutal detail. On Tuesday, he terminated our contract with Henderson Chemical, switching to a supplier that charged 30% less but lacked proper hazmat certifications. On Wednesday, he canceled our backup inventory orders, reducing our safety stock to industry standard levels. On Friday, he eliminated 3 secondary suppliers, consolidating all orders with the cheapest bidders. Each change saved money on paper. Each change violated safety protocols I'd spent years establishing. But Brad didn't just cut costs. He started taking credit for the savings, presenting them to the board as his strategic innovations. I sat in weekly leadership meetings watching him use PowerPoint slides built from my vendor data, claiming that his operational insights had identified millions in waste. The key insight, Brad told the board during one presentation, was recognizing that legacy operational thinking was preventing us from achieving optimal efficiency. By applying modern supply chain principles, we've already realized $400,000 in quarterly savings. Legacy operational thinking. That was how he described the safety protocols that had kept our workers alive for 8 years. After the meeting, board members congratulated Brad on his fresh perspective. William Kellerman beamed with paternal pride. Several directors mentioned that this kind of innovative thinking was exactly what the company needed as it planned for the future. I said nothing. I just made notes, because what Brad didn't understand, what his McKinsey training had never taught him, was that in manufacturing, consequences have a way of revealing themselves. The vendors he'd eliminated weren't expensive because they were greedy. They were expensive because they followed safety protocols that prevented explosions, chemical spills, and worker injuries. The backup inventory he'd cut wasn't waste. It was protection against the supply chain disruptions that could shut us down for weeks. The emergency suppliers he'd canceled weren't redundancy. They were lifelines for when primary vendors failed during crises. Brad was about to learn these lessons the hard way. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning when I discovered what Brad had done with our chemical storage protocols. I was walking through the plant floor, conducting my usual safety inspection, when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In Bay 7, where we stored industrial solvents, the specialized containment pallets had been replaced with standard wooden platforms. The expensive spill containment systems were gone, replaced with basic plastic sheeting. I pulled up the purchase orders on my phone. Brad had authorized the change 3 days earlier, switching from our certified hazmat supplier to a general industrial vendor. The savings, $23,000 quarterly. The risk, a chemical spill that could evacuate half the town. "What the hell is this?" I muttered, photographing the setup with my phone. I marched straight to Brad's office, but he was in meetings all afternoon. By the time I caught him, it was nearly 6 p.m. Most of the office had cleared out, leaving just the security lighting and the distant hum of the night shift. "Brad, we need to talk," I said, stepping into his office without knocking. He looked up from his laptop, annoyed at the interruption. "Rick, I'm preparing for tomorrow's board presentation. Can this wait?" "No, it can't," I said, showing him the photos on my phone. "You replaced our hazmat storage systems with wooden pallets and plastic sheeting. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Brad glanced at the photos and shrugged. "We rationalized our storage solutions to eliminate redundant safety protocols. The new system meets basic regulatory requirements at a fraction of the cost." "Basic regulatory requirements?" I stared at him in disbelief. "Those chemicals can eat through concrete. One spill and we're looking at an environmental disaster." "Rick, I appreciate your concern, but you're thinking about this wrong," Brad said, turning back to his laptop. "We can't let worst-case scenarios drive our operational decisions. That's how companies become inefficient." That's when I realized Brad wasn't just incompetent. He was dangerous. He was making decisions that could kill people, and he was too arrogant to listen to anyone who understood the consequences. You're right, I said quietly. We can't let worst-case scenarios drive our decisions. That night, I went home and made a phone call that would change everything. The OSHA regional office in Cincinnati answered on the third ring. I'd called the main number but asked to be transferred to the anonymous safety tip line. 18 years in manufacturing had taught me that sometimes the only way to protect workers is to go around management. I'd like to report potential safety violations at a manufacturing facility, I said, keeping my voice steady. The intake specialist was professional and thorough. She asked for the company name, location, and specific concerns. I gave her everything: the chemical storage downgrades, the elimination of certified suppliers, the reduction in safety inventory. I mentioned that changes had been made by someone using operations management credentials but without proper safety training. Sir, these sound like serious concerns, she said. We'll need to schedule an inspection. Can you provide documentation? I can provide purchase orders, supplier certifications, and system logs showing when the changes were made, I replied. Everything's documented. We'll be in touch with the facility within 72 hours to schedule an inspection, she said. Thank you for the report. I hung up, feeling like I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. But as I sat in my garage thinking about those chemicals sitting on wooden pallets, I knew I'd made the right choice. Brad's cost-cutting wasn't just stupid, it was criminal. The next morning, Brad was practically glowing with excitement. His board presentation was scheduled for 10 a.m., and he'd spent weeks preparing what he called his operational transformation roadmap. He was going to present 6 months of additional cost-cutting initiatives, all built on the foundation of his first month's successes. I attended the meeting, sitting in my usual spot at the back. Brad clicked through slide after slide of projected savings, vendor consolidations, and efficiency improvements. The board ate it up. As you can see, Brad concluded, we're just getting started. By implementing these additional optimizations, we can reduce operational costs by another $8 million annually while maintaining full production capacity. William Kellerman stood up and applauded. Several board members followed suit. This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need, William said. Brad, I'm authorizing you to proceed with full implementation. Brad beamed like he'd just won the lottery. He had no idea that in 48 hours, federal inspectors would walk through our facility and discover every shortcut he'd taken using my credentials. The OSHA inspection team arrived on a Tuesday morning like federal thunderstorms, sudden, powerful, and impossible to ignore. 3 inspectors in government-issued windbreakers walked through our front doors at exactly 8:15 a.m., carrying clipboards, cameras, and the kind of authority that makes corporate executives sweat. I was in my office when the call came from reception. Rick, there are federal inspectors here asking to speak with operations management. I walked to the lobby and introduced myself to the lead inspector, a serious woman named Janet Morrison, who looked like she'd been shutting down unsafe factories since before Brad was born. Mr. Donovan, we're here to investigate safety violations reported at this facility, she said, showing me her credentials. We'll need to conduct a comprehensive inspection of your chemical storage areas, supplier documentation, and safety protocols. Of course, I said. I'll escort you personally. 20 minutes later, Brad arrived in the lobby, looking confused and slightly panicked. Word had spread quickly that federal inspectors were on site, and William Kellerman wasn't far behind. What's this about? Brad asked, extending his hand to Inspector Morrison. You are? She replied, not taking his hand. Brad Kellerman, Chief Operating Officer. I oversee all facility operations. Inspector Morrison consulted her clipboard. We received reports of safety violations in chemical storage, improper supplier certifications, and unauthorized changes to hazmat protocols. We understand these changes were made using operations management credentials. I watched Brad's face go pale as the implications hit him. He glanced at me, then back at the inspector. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding, Brad said. All our operations meet or exceed regulatory requirements. That's what we're here to determine, Morrison replied. Let's start with your chemical storage areas. The next 3 hours were a masterclass in professional humiliation. Inspector Morrison and her team documented every shortcut Brad had taken, every safety protocol he'd eliminated, every corner he'd cut to achieve his cost savings. In Bay 7, they photographed the wooden pallets now holding industrial solvents that could eat through concrete. They noted the absence of proper spill containment systems, the inadequate ventilation, the lack of emergency washing stations. Who authorized these storage modifications? Morrison asked, taking pictures of the makeshift setup. Brad looked at me, then back at her. These changes were part of our operational efficiency improvements. Efficiency improvements? Morrison raised an eyebrow. Sir, this storage configuration violates 3 separate OSHA regulations and 2 EPA requirements. By noon, the inspection had moved to the conference room where Inspector Morrison was reviewing documentation with increasingly grim efficiency. She had spread purchase orders, supplier certifications, and safety reports across the table, like evidence at a crime scene. Mr. Kellerman, she said to Brad, can you explain why your facility switched from Henderson Chemical, a certified hazmat supplier, to Midwest Industrial, which lacks proper certifications for the materials you're storing? Brad fumbled through his laptop, pulling up spreadsheets. Henderson was significantly more expensive. Midwest Industrial offered the same products at 30% cost savings. The same products, but without hazmat transport certification, proper storage protocols, or emergency response capabilities, Morrison replied. Are you aware that using uncertified suppliers for regulated chemicals is a federal violation? William Kellerman, who had been silent throughout the inspection, finally spoke up. Inspector, if there are compliance issues, we'll address them immediately. This company has operated safely for 70 years. Mr. Kellerman, we've identified 23 separate safety violations, each carrying significant fines, Morrison said, consulting her notes. The improper chemical storage alone carries a penalty of $400,000. The uncertified supplier violations add another $800,000. And the elimination of required safety equipment brings the total to $2. $3 million in federal fines. The room went completely silent. You could hear the ventilation system humming and the distant sound of the production floor. There's also the matter of willful endangerment, Morrison continued. These weren't accidental oversights. Our investigation shows deliberate elimination of safety protocols to reduce costs. That's criminal negligence. Brad's face had gone from pale to green. Criminal negligence? Federal prosecutors will make that determination, Morrison said. But eliminating safety protocols that protect workers can result in criminal charges for responsible executives. William turned to Brad with a look I'd never seen before, not anger, but something colder. Disappointment mixed with fear for his company's survival. Brad, William said quietly, I need to understand exactly how these changes were made. That's when Brad made his fatal mistake. Instead of taking responsibility, he tried to deflect blame. I made these modifications using the operations management system, Brad said. Rick gave me his login credentials to implement efficiency improvements. Every head in the room turned to me. The moment Brad tried to throw me under the bus, I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the folder I'd been preparing for weeks. 18 years of covering my ass in corporate America had taught me that documentation beats deflection every time. Actually, I said, opening the folder, I think there might be some confusion about how these changes were made. I slid the first document across the table to Inspector Morrison. This is a complete log of system access using my credentials over the past 6 weeks. Every login, every change, every modification is time-stamped and recorded. Morrison examined the log, her eyebrows rising as she read. This shows 47 separate system accesses using your credentials, Mr. Donovan. But the IP addresses and timestamps indicate you weren't at your workstation for any of these sessions. That's correct, I said. Mr. Kellerman requested my login information to review our supplier systems. I provided it at his direct instruction. I pulled out the next document. Here's the email thread where he requested access, along with my written response providing the credentials. Brad's face was now completely white. Rick, you never told me these changes would violate regulations. Actually, I did, I said, pulling out another document. Here's the detailed briefing I gave you about our supplier qualifications, safety protocols, and regulatory requirements. I specifically explained why certain vendors were more expensive and why our safety inventory levels were necessary. I handed Inspector Morrison a thick stack of papers. These are copies of every safety protocol, vendor certification, and compliance requirement that was eliminated or modified. Each one includes my written explanation of why it existed and the risks of changing it. William Kellerman was staring at his son with growing horror. Brad, you had Rick's written warnings about safety risks and you made these changes anyway? I thought he was being overly conservative, Brad stammered. The cost savings were significant, and I believed we could maintain safety with more efficient protocols. More efficient? Inspector Morrison looked up from the documents. You stored corrosive chemicals on wooden pallets and replaced emergency washing stations with basic sinks. There's nothing efficient about creating environmental hazards. I pulled out my final piece of evidence. Inspector, there's one more thing you should know. Every change, Mr. Kellerman made using my credentials was logged and documented in real time. I have a complete audit trail showing not just what was changed, but when and how it deviated from regulatory requirements. You documented everything? William asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Everything, I confirmed. 18 years in operations taught me that when safety is at stake, you document every decision and every warning you give. Inspector Morrison spent the next hour reviewing my documentation with the thoroughness of a federal prosecutor building a case. Every warning I'd given Brad was there in black and white. Every safety protocol he'd eliminated was documented with explanations of why it existed. Every regulatory requirement he'd violated was highlighted with my written warnings about the consequences. Mr. Donovan, Morrison said finally, this documentation shows you repeatedly warned Mr. Kellerman about regulatory violations and safety risks. Did he acknowledge these warnings? He dismissed them as legacy thinking and said I was being overly conservative, I replied. He believed his consulting experience gave him better insight into operational efficiency than my 18 years in manufacturing. William Kellerman looked like he'd aged a decade in the past hour. His son, his heir apparent, had not only violated federal safety regulations but had done so after being explicitly warned about the risks. Worse, he'd tried to blame the operations manager who documented everything. Brad, William said quietly, I need you to step outside while we finish this discussion. Dad, I can explain. Step outside, now. After Brad left, the conversation turned to damage control. Inspector Morrison explained that the violations were serious enough to trigger criminal referrals, but the company's cooperation and my documentation might help in any negotiation with federal prosecutors. The fact that Mr. Donovan documented his warnings and maintained audit trails shows the company has employees who understand their regulatory obligations, Morrison said. That's going to matter when prosecutors review this case. William turned to me with a look I'd never seen before, respect mixed with desperation. Rick, I need to ask you directly. Can we fix this? I'd been waiting 18 years for someone to ask me that question with genuine respect for my expertise. Yes, I said. But it's going to take time, money, and commitment to doing things the right way. Whatever it takes, William said. I'm putting you in charge of the remediation. Full authority, whatever budget you need, direct access to me and the board. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. I'll need to bring back Henderson Chemical, restore our safety inventory levels, and reinstall proper hazmat storage systems. It's going to cost about $1, $2 million to fix what Brad broke. Done, William said without hesitation. What else? I'll need a new title that reflects the authority you're giving me, I said. Vice President of Operations, reporting directly to you. Done, William said again. Rick, I should have done this years ago. After the inspectors left, promising to return in 30 days to verify remediation, William called an emergency board meeting. I wasn't invited to that discussion, but the outcome was swift and decisive. Brad Kellerman was terminated effective immediately. Not resigned, not reassigned, terminated. The board voted unanimously to remove him from all positions and strip him of any future ownership stakes in the company. When a federal investigation threatens criminal charges, even family loyalty has limits. I learned later that the board meeting lasted 4 hours. William had to explain how his son had used my credentials to implement dangerous cost-cutting measures despite repeated warnings about safety violations. He had to show them the $2, $3 million in federal fines we were facing, and the potential criminal liability that came with willful endangerment of workers. By Thursday morning, it was official. I was Vice President of Operations, reporting directly to the CEO, with full authority over all supply chain, safety, and regulatory compliance functions. My first task was to undo every change Brad had made and restore the safety protocols that had kept our workers safe for 8 years. The remediation took 6 weeks and cost $1. $4 million, even more than I'd projected. We had to emergency order new hazmat storage systems, restore relationships with certified suppliers, and rebuild our safety inventory from scratch. Every day of delay increased our exposure to regulatory penalties, but there were no shortcuts back to compliance. Henderson Chemical welcomed us back with professional grace, though their pricing reflected the cost of our betrayal. Our emergency suppliers were understanding but firm about new contract terms. It turns out that when you eliminate vendors for cost savings, they remember that when you come crawling back. The workers noticed the changes immediately. Safety equipment was restored, proper storage systems were reinstalled, and the emergency stations Brad had eliminated were upgraded beyond their original specifications. I made sure every employee understood that safety was our top priority, not an afterthought to be optimized away. By the time OSHA returned for their follow-up inspection, we were cleaner than we'd been in years. Inspector Morrison spent 2 days reviewing our remediation and found 0 violations. The federal fines were reduced to $800,000 based on our cooperation and comprehensive fixes. 6 months later, I was sitting in the same conference room where Brad had presented his operational efficiency improvements to the board. This time, I was the one clicking through PowerPoint slides, but my presentation told a different story. Since implementing our enhanced safety protocols, I told the board, we've achieved 0 safety incidents, maintained 100% regulatory compliance, and actually reduced our operational costs by 12% through genuine efficiency improvements. The board members, many of whom had applauded Brad's reckless cost-cutting, now listened with the respect that comes from seeing real results. My improvements came from experience, not spreadsheet optimization. Negotiating better terms with certified suppliers, implementing predictive maintenance to reduce emergency repairs, optimizing inventory turnover without eliminating safety stock. How were you able to reduce costs while increasing safety spending? Asked Margaret Stevens, the board's longest-serving member. Because real efficiency comes from understanding your operations, not just analyzing them, I replied. When you know which costs are necessary and which are waste, you can cut the waste without compromising safety. William Kellerman looked older but wiser. The federal investigation had been closed without criminal charges, thanks largely to my documentation and the company's full cooperation. But the experience had sobered him about the difference between fresh thinking and dangerous ignorance. Rick, William said after the meeting, I owe you an apology. I should have promoted you to this level years ago. Maybe, I said, but I might not have appreciated it the same way if I hadn't earned it. 3 weeks later, I got a LinkedIn message from Brad. He'd moved to California and was working as a business development associate at a tech startup, a significant step down from heir apparent to a $400 million manufacturing company. The message was 2 paragraphs of corporate speak that basically amounted to an apology without actually taking responsibility. I read it twice, then deleted it without responding. That evening, I sat in my new office, corner location, windows overlooking the factory floor, reviewing the quarterly safety reports. 0 incidents, 0 violations, 0 shortcuts. 18 years of experience finally being put to proper use. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Dinner's ready. Don't work too late, Mr. Vice President. I smiled, shut down my computer, and headed home to my family. A year later, I was invited to speak at the National Manufacturing Safety Conference in Chicago. The invitation came because our plant had achieved the best safety record in our industry while maintaining profitability, a combination that's rarer than it should be. Standing at the podium, looking out at 500 manufacturing professionals, I thought about the lesson Brad Kellerman had taught me without meaning to. Sometimes the best way to protect what you've built is to give someone exactly what they think they want. Experience isn't just about years on the job, I told the audience. It's about understanding that in manufacturing, there are no shortcuts to safety. Every protocol exists because someone learned a hard lesson. Every safety measure represents a choice between doing things right and doing things cheap. After my presentation, a young MBA approached me during the networking break. He looked exactly like Brad had. Expensive suit, confident handshake, fresh ideas about operational efficiency. Mr. Donovan, he said, I really appreciated your presentation. I'm starting as operations director at a plant in Ohio next month. Any advice for someone bringing fresh perspectives to manufacturing? I studied his eager face and remembered myself at 22, hungry to prove my worth. The difference was, I'd started in the warehouse and worked my way up. This kid was starting in management and working his way where? Listen more than you talk, I said. Learn why things are done before you try to change them. And remember that the people who've been there longest usually know something you don't. He nodded enthusiastically, but I could see in his eyes that he'd already decided he was different. He was the innovator who would optimize what others had built through outdated thinking. I handed him my business card. Call me if you have questions, I said. Manufacturing is a tough teacher, but it's honest. It shows you the consequences of your decisions pretty quickly. 6 months later, he called. His plant had failed a safety inspection after he'd streamlined their chemical storage procedures. He wanted advice on handling regulatory investigators. I gave him the same advice I wish someone had given Brad. Tell the truth, take responsibility, and fix the problems the right way. Some lessons can only be learned through failure, but at least they can be learned. These days I keep my login credentials to myself, not because I don't trust people, but because I've learned that trust has to be earned through understanding, not just authority. When someone wants access to systems that protect workers' lives, they need to prove they understand what they're asking for. The factory runs safely. Our workers go home healthy every day. And I sleep well knowing that 18 years of experience finally got the respect it deserved. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being right all along.
I'm freezing. I'm bleeding. Slowly fading away. But don't worry. I'm fine. The cold has settled in my heartbeat, like winter living in my veins. Every breath feels numb and fragile. Every smile just hides the pain. I'm breaking quietly in silence, falling slow without a sound. Yet I keep saying I'm okay, while my world burns to the ground. I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry. I'll pretend till my last breath. Even while my soul is fading, I'll say everything's okay. Maybe pain just learned to live here. Maybe sorrow feels like home. So I wear my wounds like armor and survive them all alone. I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry. I'll pretend till my last breath. Even while my soul is fading, I'll say everything's okay. If you ever see me smiling, no, it's just my last defense. 'Cause sometimes love means hiding how much you're suffering. No, I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry. I'll pretend till my last breath. Even while my soul is fading, I'll say everything's okay. It's okay. Don't pity me. My heart doesn't need your mercy. I can still stand on my own. I was broken by your leaving, fell deeper than I thought I would. But pain has taught me how to heal now and survive what once I couldn't. You don't have to look back sadly, don't reach out with guilty hands. What you shattered made me stronger. Now I rise where I once collapsed. My heart doesn't need your pity, not another empty sign. I've got enough strength left within me to rebuild this life of mine. My feet are steady through the sorrow. I can stand through all the pain. You don't have to save me, darling. I'll learn to breathe again. I once begged for your affection. Now I've learned my worth in scars. And the man you left in pieces found his own way through the dark. My heart doesn't need your pity, not another empty sign. I've got enough strength left within me to rebuild this life of mine. My feet are steady through the sorrow. I can stand through all the pain. You don't have to save me, darling. I'll learn to breathe again. Begun. My heart doesn't need your pity, not another empty sign. I've got enough strength left within me to rebuild this life of mine. My feet are steady through the sorrow. I can stand through all the pain. You don't have to save me, darling. I'll rise alone again. I'll rise alone again.